So welcome to Mex Moves, our weekly podcast on Mexico business and finance. How are you, Eduardo?
Doing well, Damian. How are you?
I'm here in London, suffering the overwhelming heat wave. But that aside, good. Excited for the game on Saturday against Norway. Sorry that it's not Mexico. So this week, we have a terrific interview with Francisco Ramos. Francisco is the Vice President and Head of Latin American Content for Netflix. He's going to tell us why Netflix has been so successful to date in Mexico, but also what it now needs to do to stay ahead of the game and of the competitors, the biggest of which is probably YouTube at this point. And first, Eduardo, let's address the news of the week. I think we have the Toyota news. We have the Equifax buying the credit bureau, Círculo de Crédito. We have Aviva, the fintech, raising some money. Why don't we kick off with the Toyota news? What's your take on what, on the face of it, seems quite negative?
Yeah, I mean, just to wrap it up a little bit, Toyota announced earlier this week that it would move part of the production of its pickup truck branded Tacoma from its plant in Baja California, near Tijuana and Tecate, to San Antonio, Texas, where it already has a plant there. And obviously, that would imply the loss of a manufacturing facility in Mexico and a win of a manufacturing or a production line in the U.S., which is exactly what Trump has been trying to accomplish with its tariffs on autos imported from either Mexico or Canada. That's a 25% tariff minus the U.S. content that the vehicles have. The few talks I had with people very much that know about this topic, it's that it is in fact a reflection of that tariff. That it's a negative decision for Mexico, although Toyota will do it gradually. It's not gonna be emptying that plant tomorrow. It'll take 4 years to do so, and he hasn't really announced what the future will be for that facility and the workers that it has or that it employs there. It's not clear. I mean, the company obviously on its statement said that it would create 2,000 jobs in America, which is what Trump has been looking to do with those tariffs and tariffs all over the world. But it's not sure whether those would be necessarily manufacturing jobs because, as you know, Damian, today many production lines are automated and they require fewer workers than it did before. The repercussions for Mexico are, I think, in essence negative because it does prove that Trump's case is winning not for the benefit of the consumer or the benefit of the company itself. Many people think that Toyota wouldn't announce this if it hadn't been for those tariffs. And also, one element that probably added to this was the fact that the free trade agreement will be renegotiated every year or reviewed every year for the next few years at least until the Trump administration finishes in 3 years. But that's the reality. On the other hand, we have heard and we've commented here of GM bringing production from China to Mexico. So it's a mixed bag. I think the announcement by Toyota is not good, but it's not necessarily also the end of the world. And I have some other good news on statistics about the auto car market here in Mexico. But what do you think of the Toyota before I go into that?
Yeah, I mean, I think first, as you say, there's no other take on it but negative. Production's moving from Mexico to the US and nearshoring, 1.0 was meant to be the other way around. Second, it's clearly related to the tariffs and uncertainty about tariffs and complexity about tariffs because the goalposts are constantly moving. Right now, as we've heard on this podcast, in certain cases, because it is quite complex, Mexico pays higher tariffs than Japan or Europe, which are paying roughly 15. Mexico pays 25 minus US value added. So it depends case by case what Mexico is actually paying, but they can end up paying more. And that's obviously one of the factors behind this. The number of jobs, when I read the press release, struck me as quite small. I mean, 3,000 jobs, it's obviously in the greater scheme of things, minuscule in the US, and not sure how many people work there in Mexico, but if it's, something similar to that, or even if it's double that, it's still tiny. So I think a secondary question will be whether Toyota will continue to be, integrated with supply chains in Mexico, and that there isn't a kind of knock-on effect through the car parts. But the final assembly doesn't, as you said, take up that many jobs. So it's a negative signal. If other car companies are looking at this issue, I'm sure they get to some extent influenced by what Toyota is doing. So that might lead to further decisions. Nissan is obviously struggling globally. Its exports from Mexico to the United States are down a lot. They've already announced closing one plant in Mexico, and maybe we could expect more news there if their restructuring continues. So yes, not good news. Not a lot of jobs on the face of it. We have to look at what the supply chain sort of impacts are, and we have to look at whether this influences other car companies' behavior.
That's correct. I mean, the auto parts that probably supply the plant in Baja California from Mexico will continue to do so, but just across the border, although we'll have to wait and see what the Toyota decides to do on that front. On the other hand, there were some positive news on sales cars here in Mexico. In the first half of the year, they've grown 5.3%. That's much higher than the growth rate of the economy. There are several interesting factors influencing that I think Enrique Quintana really well delved into them in a column a few days back. And some of that is that the change of how consumers are purchasing cars. And the other element that is quite interesting is the number of credits that are being granted in Mexico for auto acquisitions. In the first case, Mexicans are moving out of the mid-size sedan type of vehicles to smaller compact vehicles. Those are growing at a faster rate than the other ones, which falls into what we have expressed here about how the consumer in Mexico is very price-oriented at this moment. They are looking at cheaper products, and so it looks that does not just influence day-to-day consumer items, but also vehicles. And the credit has grown quite significantly, which is also propelling the sale of a larger number of vehicles in the country. We are also underestimating car sales in Mexico because all the Chinese companies that are present in Mexico do not report yet its numbers to the associations or to INEGI, which is now gathering the information on the car industry here in the country. So it's probably even bigger, the growth rate of the car sales in the country than it's been reported. Chinese companies are doing very well. The ones that are reporting have been gaining market share. China is now surpassed Germany, according to Axios Negocios, in the share of the overall car cake that Mexico has. That's significant. You can see a lot of vehicles from China now roaming the streets of Mexico, and German cars which are more expensive generally, with the exception of Volkswagen probably, are suffering in the current state of the market. So good news in that sense that the car companies here in Mexico are selling more. Many are imported, obviously, but it does show that the consumer is still active, and with a bit of credit, it's willing to acquire more vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, good news if you think people driving more cars is a positive thing. I'm not a eco warrior, but as someone who lives in Mexico City, seeing the number of cars growing and the number of roads not growing, logically that means more traffic and more pollution, more global warming, and so on. So it has some negative side effects. Luckily, I use a bike, so it doesn't affect me too much. And as you say, the Chinese cars, I was looking this up actually, there's certain brands that do report and certain that don't. So MG, Geely or Geely, JAC report. So the reported market share is 11.5%. But the AMDA Association thinks that the non-reported, which is sort of BYD, especially, which don't report, it's another 7%. So if you add those two up, you get to about 19% market share, and that's all pretty much, it's all imported. So although the pie has grown, it hasn't grown as much as Chinese made cars has grown. So domestic production has fallen, and you see that in the first quarter numbers. So car production in Mexico, including exports and domestic sales, was down about 2%. Exports June were down 9%, and the pickup in domestic sales basically all went to China. But it is we've talked about this, and everyone else has talked about it. But back in 2021, 5 years ago, Chinese made cars, or Chinese branded cars, because we also have Chinese made cars, General Motors and so on, was like 2%, less than 2%. Now it's sort of 19%. So it's almost all of this growth has gone to Chinese exports to Mexico. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It makes cars more affordable. Cars, not just for pleasure, but for getting people to work and opening up their work opportunities. So I think it's good, except for the traffic impact. But it's not going to Mexican-made cars, and on top of that, you've got this export challenge that Mexico is facing. So should we move on? I thought this Equifax news, buying Círculo de Crédito. So Equifax is one of the big three credit data companies in the US, and it announced on July the 7th that it's buying 100% of Círculo de Crédito, one of the two main credit bureaus in Mexico. They're paying about an enterprise value of about $750 million. And that's, I think, about 12 times EBITDA. It has a net cash position, so the equity price was a bit higher than that. The sellers were Electra, Coppel, Afirme, and it has a 33% market share. The biggest credit bureau was Bureau de Crédito, which was sold, has about a 2/3 market share. It was sold by the big Mexican banks to TransUnion last year. That TransUnion and Bureau de Crédito thus are the dominant players, but this obviously is an important transaction. The Círculo de Crédito is focused more on the sort of, let's say, non-traditional lenders like Electra and Coppel, and the fintechs. It's gone very fast with the fintechs. It says it has 1,700 clients, 80 million validated identities, and 60% of its so-called trade lines are unique to Círculos. They have a lot of people who are, especially Electra and Coppel customers, and some of the fintech customers that are not in the formal economy. And what struck me is what a great business it is. The revenues were last 12 months about $134 million, and EBITDA was $62 million. So they have a 46% EBITDA margin with very little, if any, capital costs. So that's why they had a net cash position, and they're growing. Although they're smaller than their main competitor, than Bureau de Crédito, they're apparently growing faster, which I guess would be because of the fintech element. They said that fintech revenues are growing over 50%, and the fintechs, especially ones like Story, are targeting sort of underbanked informal workers, where having more data on that type of customer is obviously key. Now, I think the idea here is not just to have a sort of nicer credit bureau owned by Americans, but to do more with this data. So the idea is that the new owners will, upsell the data for fraud prevention, identity verification, help with collections, embedded finance, buy now, pay later, telecom credit. So they're going to bring a lot of additional products that they've learned from other parts of the world, because Equifax has been on a buying spree. They've spent over $5 billion buying credit bureaus in different parts of the world. So they've obviously got a lot of know-how and global best practices to deploy some of these additional products and services in the Mexico market. Now, it's also part of a trend of the banks getting rid of sort of non-core businesses. So as you may remember, they've also sold or tried to sell their credit card processing businesses. Then the big banks sold their credit bureau. Now the smaller, sort of non-traditional banks selling their credit bureau. So I think that's good, but it gives them money that they can then redeploy in lending more, we hope. But it also means that some of these ancillary businesses were effectively barriers to competition. So now that the banks don't control the credit, they can't use that information to benefit their own banks and as a barrier to entry to new banks. So I think removing these ancillary service businesses from the core banks is probably a good thing for Mexico. I think some people might worry, I don't, but that now US firms own 100% of Mexican kind of credit data, and might feel that raises sort of sovereignty issues for Mexico. But let's face it, roughly 35 to 40% of the banking system is in one Spanish bank's hands, BBVA, and if you add to that, Santander, Scotia, Citi. You're seeing a banking system that, in any case, is dominated by foreigners, more by the Spanish than by the US when it comes to core retail banking.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting transaction because Círculo de Crédito has been around only 10 years or a little bit more than 10 years, and I think with the mining capabilities, technology capabilities, AI capabilities, the data that the company has inside will be or can be very productive if you use it wisely and intelligently. So it shows that that part of Mexico is growing and it's raising interest, more so, like you say, with the banking industry that since the 1994 financial crisis became more internationalized than the governments had planned to, and so it's like you said. I don't think it's any worry or should be anything to worry about when already most of our bank accounts are in foreign hands. But also, I think the fintech growth, it's driving this probably, and that's also good for the Mexican financial industry. That we have more players, more competition, and we have a company with credit bureau that will be helping make those decisions for fintechs and other companies that want to land in Mexico. So I think it's an interesting transaction, like you said, and it reflects good on that industry that it's obviously growing at a good pace.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that did occur to me is that whenever Ricardo Salinas is from Banco Azteca selling you something, you might want to think twice. And presumably Banco Azteca is a core client of this business. When he also was a core shareholder, that probably worked for both sides. Now he's not going to be a shareholder. Will they internalize the credit data as they used to do before they set up with Círculo de Crédito? I don't know. Will they provide the same quality of data? I don't know. But, clearly it worked. They have almost a 50% margin. Their growth has been spectacular. But when you change the shareholder base and you also change incentives and you become less aligned perhaps with the ultimate objectives. So we'll see, whether the business remains as beautiful as it has been now that it has new owners. Then I don't know, but I always ask that question when someone's selling me something. Why are they selling?
And how are you going to work without that partner in the future? I don't know Equifax, but I'm sure they've read a few stories and might have taken some precautions in the contract.
Yeah, well, Yeah, contracts aren't always worth their weight in gold in this part of the world.
Exactly. Less so here than in other places.
So another interesting financial story: Aviva, to credit fintech, they raised another $18 million in the Series A. So fintech fundraising, perhaps definitely more selectively than 2021, is coming back, because you've also seen some other, as we've talked about, some other decent fintech raises this year. What's interesting about Aviva is that they're focused on, as far as I understand, lower sort of middle income customers. They have kiosks outside, in many cases outside sort of big supermarkets. You go into the kiosk, you speak to, you have a video call, they process information, a lot of non-traditional kind of data on people, to decide whether to issue a credit, and then they issue the credit, using AI tools and machine learning very, very quickly. So it's a combination of physical and digital, or phygital, as some people call it. They've been raising money for a while now, and based on what they've said, their numbers are good. The fact that they've been able to continue to raise suggests that there's some substance to that, and they are very much focused on giving Mexicans who hitherto have not had access to credit, or have had access to very expensive credit or informal credit, and that's clearly improving financial inclusion. And for all I know, they're clients of Círculo de Crédito as well. I don't know, but it's the kind of customer that Círculo de Crédito has been more focused on versus Bureau de Crédito. So maybe.
Yeah, they did announce that part of the funds will be used to increase the number of kiosks that you just mentioned, Damian, about. They plan to increase it in about 1,000 new places around Mexico. The company is already present in 23, I think, of Mexico's 23 of Mexico's 32 states, in 300 small cities. Again, they're looking at a market that might not be very well serviced by others, and so kudos for them. Let's see how they performed going forward. And fintech, as you are very much enthralled by it, and so am I, is moving, kicking, and growing, hopefully healthy, for the benefit of all consumers and the owners of these companies. Why not?
So on the economic side, just moving to quick takes, we saw some good investment news. In fixed investment, was up about 4% in April, seasonally adjusted. I think that was the strongest monthly gain in 5 years. I think the market was looking at like 3%. So, investment has been, the really big weak spot in overall GDP this year. So to see a good number in investment, even if it's just 1 month, is clearly encouraging. It was driven by construction, that was up 6.5%, I think, seasonally adjusted month on month. Residential construction was strong. Maybe decline in interest rates is helping a bit there. Public housing seems to be improving as well. Also, we saw good numbers out of public sector investment. Some people think that might have been related to the finishing of a lot of World Cup projects just before the World Cup in April. Passenger trains and also may have helped. And machinery and equipment, which is where the private sector is more orientated, was also up at like 2%, not as good as the overall numbers, but and the year-on-year numbers remain weak. So we're seeing sort of some encouraging signs. It's still a bit too early, and considering what investment has been so weak for the last couple of years, we're still below where we were back when Sheinbaum took office. So too early to declare victory, but some positive signs that the economy in the second quarter will do a bit better than it did in the first quarter.
Right. The administration praised that number in its daily press conference yesterday, and a few others, as consumer sentiment. They're trying to present a brighter picture. And they have some numbers that back it up. Not everything is rosy, but yes, there are signs that things are not as well, that things might be picking up a little bit. And I hope the World Cup also delivers good numbers in some way, as the team did, despite the loss against England last Sunday, which was quite painful, but it was fantastic to be in the stadium. On my side, Damian, just a little quick take as well with TV Azteca, the large broadcasting company here in Mexico owned by Ricardo Salinas, receiving bankruptcy protection just a few days ago. That was something that was expected, but it's now materialized, and that will allow the company to renegotiate or restructure all of its debt in an orderly fashion with its creditors. The company will now have no problem in stop paying its debts, with the idea that this will give it time between 6 months and a year to reach an agreement with its debtors. Among some of the debts that the company has is a $400 million bond that TV Azteca issued abroad in 2017 and was supposed to pay back 2 years ago, but he hasn't. And this protection comes nearly 4 months after TV Azteca asked Mexico's bankruptcy courts to process this request to renegotiate its financial obligations. So breathing room for TV Azteca for the moment.
Yeah, and on the World Cup, we talked last week about Constellation Brands, which brews and sells in the US, Grupo Modelo's beers. They took a big hit, their stock price, when Mexico, US, and to a lesser extent Canada were all eliminated from the last 16. Sense is that Mexican beer is going to sell a lot less well in the US now that we're down to the quarterfinals and then the semifinals. So they were a financial loser from Mexico's exit and the US's exit.
Yeah, painful exits for our region, I gotta say.
So I'm in Britain actually, and the British press has obviously been full of stories about the game in the Azteca Stadium, and so has social media. And the one of the things that has really, really kind of struck a chord here, and wherever I've gone, people have talked about it, is how when the game. So during the game, everyone was booing every time England hit the ball, and it was the loudest sort of noise people had ever heard. And as soon as the game ended and Mexico was eliminated, the Mexican fans, on average, went up to the British fans and congratulated them. This is something that does not happen in England, and they were like really, really impressed by the graciousness of the Mexicans post game to the English fans.
Yeah, it happened. I was there. The booing was loud before the match started, even during the match. But at the end of the match, and I got to tell you this, in the Azteca Stadium, they played Hey Jude, Opla Di, Opla Dad. And the British fans, which were in one side of the stadium, were really happy. Nobody was getting involved with them. They just, each one went their way. And when they exit the stadium, there were a lot of congratulatory recognition for a well-fought game. So that was quite nice. I gotta say also, they didn't boo when the British national anthem was played. I was surprised. So kudos for Mexico in that sense. Not everyone, but most of the fans were quite gracious. Shall we move to the Netflix interview, Damian?
Absolutely. So today on Mex Moves by White Paper, we have a real privilege and honor to be with Francisco Ramos. Paco is the Vice President of Content for Latin America at Netflix. How are you, Paco?
Thank you. But the privilege is ours and mine to be here with all of you. Incredible work you do. Thank you. Oh, good. Just a good moment for us.
Terrific. Well, Paco is Mexican, grew up Mexico City. He built much of his career in Spain as a distributor, as a producer, as a media executive, and he joined Netflix in 2017. Since then, Netflix in Mexico and indeed in the rest of the world has grown very dramatically. I think you now have 400 people, is that right, in Mexico or something along those lines?
At the office, yes. I mean, it's also because there is so many new teams, part of our expansion, like ads and engineering, that we have been able to continue hiring Mexicans.
And on the content side, Paco has overseen production of some big hits, Pedro Páramo, most recently 100 Years of Solitude, Mexico 86, congratulations, great series, and Netflix, although there aren't official numbers, is probably the largest streamer in Mexico and Latin America. So Paco, let's start with a brief overview of Netflix in Mexico. You recently announced $1 billion investment where over a 4-year period, $250 million a year. Tell us a little bit where that investment is going, how Netflix is doing, and where you would like to take Netflix in Mexico and Latin America from the content side over the next few years.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Mexico has been a success story for us from the beginning. The first non-English language series we ever commissioned and produced is Mexican. It's Club de Cuervos. And then Club de Cuervos opened or paved the way to understanding that in order for us to be immersed into our members' desires in every country where we operate, or most of the countries where we operate, local content was going to play a very, very important role. Because then you not only see the best content from other countries, but very especially you see the best content from your own country and your own people and your own stories and your own cities and your own countries and your own culture. So then that first series enabled the second and so on and so forth until 11 or 12 years later. This is pretty much our strategy, local content at scale in most of the countries where we operate, in order to build something that is perceived for our members as very global, but specifically very local. Then Mexico has a very rich history of audiovisual culture, both in cinema and in television. Television mostly from telenovelas, for sure, but telenovelas have been very, very important in building that relationship between our Mexicans and the television they watch. So we very rapidly discovered that they really love, even more so than content from other countries, content from Mexico itself. So then we started growing and growing and growing. And it became the reason why we have grown so much. Not the only reason, but one of the main reasons, if not the main. It enabled also the development of the infrastructures and all the creative and productive contexts that are required in order to make premium and high-level television and film that didn't exist. And we are not the only ones operating, so this is not like I'm saving anything, but we paved the way in a way. As the talent and the ability to make bigger and bolder and more ambitious series and films became ready for the challenge, we realized that we needed to commit on a long-term basis so that context, that infrastructure, that world that we have been betting on and helping build really, really takes a leap forward and becomes something unique and special for Mexicans. That's the way we operate pretty much in every country. Of course, every country is different in terms of the industry and the type of content we're able to make. So making that commitment of $1 billion investment that we announced a year and a half ago was very important for us, because then people perceive that we're in for the long road. And in cultural industries or cultural businesses or audiovisual businesses, the long road is very important. We are very fortunate to be in a business where the artists and the creators and the producers and the production designers make the things for us. But these people need to have long-term sustaining careers. And if it's like zigzag type of industry, then you don't build a consistent career, or something even not extraordinary for our industries in each country, then the very, very good people leave. And I'm not against people leaving and finding future outside of their home territories. I did most of my career in Spain, so I understand that traveling expands and working in other countries expands your vision and expands the way you see the world. But I really feel that a country that empowers successful people to be successful at their own countries is a very powerful way to build a incredible, amazing culture. So then we said, okay, we have to commit so that people understand this is the place where we're going to be able to make the best film and best television series we've ever made in our careers. And when directors and producers, because at the end of the day, everything comes from the directors and the producers, and then the rest of the cast and crew, understand that they're going to get our support, our reach with more than 330 million members all over the world, and our budget, they're going to be making the best jobs of their lives, the best work of their lives. That's pretty much the thing. It sounds a little convoluted when I explain it because I'm not very, very synthetic, but it's very, you get the opportunity to making the best thing you've ever made if you have ambition, you have passion, if you're willing to go all in with your story.
And is that $1 billion or $250 million a year over 4 years, is that mainly going to production? Is that going to these beautiful offices here in Mexico City?
It's pretty much my budget, and it's not like split across years, because some years we make more, some years we make less, because that's part of also of our industry, is that sometimes we have a bunch of huge projects in one year, and the next year they don't come together as fast, because it takes time to put together incredible, amazing projects. So a series like Las Muertas, for instance, it took a little longer than a smaller series. So we don't want it to be mechanic. They go, this year we're going to have to make 10 movies or 10 series and 4 movies. We want it to be more agnostic in that sense, but we want them to know that we have the budget and that if they bring big projects to us, or we take them big ideas that we have or IP that we acquired, like Pedro Páramo, that we acquire the IP and then seeked out a director and a producer to make the movie with us. Then it happens, and then, for instance, 2026 is a bigger year than 2025, but 2027 could be smaller. Actually, 2027 is going to be bigger, but it's not 250 across the board. And the thing is that it's just the content budget, not only in terms of the originals we make, like the movies or films we commission and finance at 100%, but also the ones that we do co-productions, licensing. So we license a lot of stuff. You can be a producer that decides to finance your own movie through pre-sales, incentives, and then we are part of your equation, but we're not the only financier of your project. And then that way you own your project and you can do whatever you want with it. So it's the formula is open. We need to be very, very willing to just adapt our formula, let's say our way of closing that deal to whatever is best for that producer and that filmmaker so that we get the project.
And Netflix operates in most countries around the world now. What makes the Mexican market different from a viewing perspective to other markets, let's say the Colombian, Brazilian, Korean, Philippine, US market?
Okay. Yes, I mean, there is a few things that we consider and factor in order to determine the type of content we do and the amount of money we invest. And for instance, in the case of Mexico, it's high viewing for local content. It's in proportion to other countries, is a little higher than most of the countries all over the world. Then the other thing is a very healthy ecosystem of production companies and production infrastructures and structures, basically because of a big country and also because the proximity to the U.S. has developed the industry, because a lot of movies and series that are American in English that take place in the U.S. are partially shot in the U.S. or in some cases totally shot in the U.S. and we don't even know them. Sometimes I go, this looks great, and then it turns out it's shot in Mexico and I didn't even know. So for instance, there's like this Man on Fire series we just made that takes place in Brazil, but we shot a lot of action scenes in Mexico. So because the ecosystem is very good. Then there is also a thing that because of this very strong history of exporting content from Mexico, Then there is a willingness to watch Mexican content outside of Mexico. And then there is the size. This is a huge country, not only huge in terms of how many Mexicans live in Mexico, but how many Mexicans live in the U.S. So there's a lot of viewing for our Mexican content in the U.S. and in most of Latin America.
Netflix for using data to take content and production decisions. Can you give an example of how data has overridden your intuition?
No, well, I know we have this meme, and I know we have to figure out a way to debunk the meme. But basically, what helps us inform our decision, but mostly our recommendation system and our algorithms serve the way we search within our members the right audience for the right show. And we use all those metrics in order to understand what people want to watch, but not to make creative decisions. So we would never, I mean, filmmakers have come publicly say that, except a couple, but we never inform our decisions based on those decisions, on those data. And you can see that because no series seems to look exactly the way to other series. So I can say, for instance, if you think about it, for instance, two movies you mentioned, Mexico 86 versus Pedro Páramo, are two movies that obey no logic if you compare them to each other. One is like 80 minutes, the other one is like 150 minutes. One is slowly paced, delivered, takes forever, it's broken, goes back and forth in time, and you have to really watch the entire movie in order to understand what's happening, and has no concessions to beyond. The other one is pure adrenalistic entertainment, because that's the project that the director and Diego Luna wanted to make, versus the Pedro Páramo, we wanted to make a movie that loyally, honestly, and truthfully reflected the nature and intention of Juan Rulfo's novel. And that's why we hired extraordinary filmmakers and producers to make it. So it is not really that. It's just a way to inform our decisions, but not a way to make decisions.
So some people have said to me that Netflix productions are right now are quite old-fashioned, big budget, Pedro Páramo, 100 Years of Solitude. And what we're seeing that's working in the cinemas and on other platforms are more of these like YouTube figures, the A24 big hit with Backrooms right now. How are you, if you are, sort of pivoting to this more social media, sort of YouTube horror type phenomenon, and away from the more sort of traditional noventera, sort of classic high budget program?
For sure. I think that I agree with you 100% in the sense that there is something happening with popular culture that comes from not traditional way of generating popular culture that is being very successful, like Obsessions or Backrooms are the two most recent examples. And I think this is for sure. We are learning culture. We understand that we don't get it all right, and we openly say that we need to get better, and that we need to get better every single year versus the year before. I think this is something where we're in a gap, for sure. And I think also it prevents us from accessing audiences that we may not be accessing constantly, like Gen Zs or even more Gen Alpha. So this is a gap that we have to figure out how to make sure those creators feel that the best place for them in order to make their television is Netflix versus YouTube. And I think basically what happens is that they are doing it in YouTube, and it's in YouTube they have all the freedom, all the control, and it's just user-generated content, and then they share the revenue, versus our model. But then one day they say, oh, now I want to be in the film business, and they make their own films, and then we have... But by the way, both of those two films have very, very old-fashioned, not old in the sense of age, but old-fashioned traditional producers, studio-backed producers behind them. Is like Jason Blum and Peter Shorty behind those two films. So it's like, but trusting them. It's like, okay, you want to come to Netflix, we understand you have a certain amount of freedom and willingness to make, but you're going to reach a different type of audience, and you're going to be able to make your show with the same freedom. That's the way we attract these people in order for us to tap into that new way of telling stories that I find it impressive. I saw them in this order. I saw Backrooms first, like a month ago. I was in Argentina, and I went to watch it, and I was absolutely impressed. because even though I was impressed and loved the movie personally, but the friend of mine that I went with didn't like it as much as I did. But he's also a filmmaker, and he was like, but I'm impressed about the unsurmountable amount of ideas that are being thrown at the viewer, one after the other, relentlessly just throwing stuff at the audience to keep them thinking. And then I saw Obsession last week with also my friends, because I was in Spain. And then I saw and then it's the same thing. It's like relentless ideas, and all the twists do not comply with the logic of the ways theoretically we need to build the storytelling traditionally, that the way books have been written and stories have been told for millennia, and television and film have been made for 100 years. They all of a sudden go in a different way. It's like not the typical 3 acts. No. It's just, this is how I feel. This is how and it's the things that they were able to do with them for the right budget. And that's why someone took a swing. And I think that when they come and tell you you're a producer and they say, oh, but the movie's going to cost $100 million, but I want to do this weird thing, then people go, oh my God. But if you tell them it's $2 million, then I think it changes the equation. I need to figure out, not me personally, my team and I need to figure out how to tap into those audiences, but especially how to tap into those new voices that are incredible, but making sure we let them fear their way to tell their stories and not somehow make it more conventional to the point of your question.
So I guess you and your team are checking out YouTube every day to find out. So I guess you and your team are spending a bit more time going through YouTube and finding the new backdoors. That's a fair conclusion?
Yeah, and I think basically it's like those people, those kids, and it's very young. The backdoors creator I think is like 23, and the Obsession creator I think is like 21. I don't know, but super young, both of them. And I've seen some of the interviews, and the way they talk, they are actual filmmakers. They are actual storytellers. So it's not that it's accidental. These people know what they are doing, but they are just out of the industry, let's say, in a broader sense. We need to figure that out for sure, because I think also they are able to somehow really interpolate and really have audiences talking about those films. Everybody's talking about those 2 films. And then you also have like other examples, that series that were under the radar pop up and become super, super, super relevant series that weren't supposed to be super relevant. So sometimes I go like, oh, for instance, like we did División Palermo in Argentina, a small series from a creator. He got a subsidy from the Argentine Film Institute to tape a promo, like a little teaser. I think like maybe $50,000 to do the teaser or even less. And then he taped it and his little promo. And then he took it to Ventana Sur, which is like an audiovisual market in South America. And then he was super depressed because I didn't go to Ventana Sur. And then he went and said, no, this has to be on Netflix because I need the reach. And he was eminent about it. And then a friend of mine says like, hey, can I give Santi Korowski your phone? And I'm like, what is it? He's like a YouTube personality in Argentina. Why does he want to talk to me? He says like, he wants to talk to you. But I didn't ask him. I say, yeah, of course. And then he texts me and says like, everybody wants to buy this here in Ventana Sur, but you didn't come. So I said, well, someone from my team is there. No, I want you to watch my promo. After we hang up, I want to send you via WhatsApp my little promo that I made. And I watched the promo on my phone, and then I told someone in my team, I was in the other office in Torre Reforma still, and then we did 2 seasons. And he doesn't want to do more seasons. And I said, okay, fine. If you don't want to do more seasons, we don't do more seasons. No, I want to do the next thing. But the thing is that these people also are super hungry for what they want to do, because they are just trying to break and be part of the zeitgeist and establish a dialogue with society that maybe when you become a very successful producer or director or storyteller, you do not have that hunger anymore because you're part of the establishment. And I think we need to figure out how to work more with those that are not part of the establishment, for sure.
So switching to 100 Years of Solitude, the second and last part is coming out in a few weeks' time. What's your important book for me? It helped bring me to Latin America. I read it some decades ago. What's been your experience with 100 Years? What kind of impact do you think it's had on Colombia? What lessons, if any, are there for Mexico from that production?
it's one of those things that it was like a big challenge for sure, because first everybody was saying like, oh, Gabriel Garcia Marquez would have never said this to happen, but we convinced the family. His wife was still alive, and I wrote an email to her explaining what I would do. And the second thing, because once that thing is behind us and we got the rights, then everybody would write that it was an unmakeable adaptation, that it wouldn't make sense. And then basically we realized if we don't get the scripts right, we wouldn't make it. That's the other thing that I spoke with Rodrigo Garcia, who's also a filmmaker, we know each other very well. It's like, Rodrigo, if we don't really nail the scripts and figure out a way to tell the story in a way that makes sense, because the book is not chronologically told, and it goes back and forth, but that cannot happen in a televised series, however premium it may be, or we didn't know how to. And so if we don't figure out how to tell it, we shouldn't make it. And then he said, I think you're right. So then we only announced the series. We got the option, but we only announced the series once he and I liked the pitch that a writer made us about turning Aureliano Babilonia into our narrator, and that his narration would be textual extractions from the book, so that people would perceive it was Gabriel Garcia Marquez himself speaking, which in terms it is, because it's him telling the story of his own family, etc. And then he liked that, and his brother liked that, and his brother is also an artist. So it was like that part. For us, it was like a great challenge, a great experience. I think it's for the team one of the biggest experiences, a lot of learnings, what we've learned, and that we are able to achieve when we commit to something has been an extraordinary journey. But especially for Colombia, I think that when we decided to make it, we didn't really have the understanding that we could make it just with the Colombian infrastructure. So we filled the gaps of what we identified as the voids of what couldn't be accomplished through Colombia talent, with talent from all over the world, from Mexico, like production designers from Mexico, directors from other countries, one director from other countries, editors, musicians, etc. But then as we went, we also realized that people basically what they needed was the opportunity. And sometimes there is this bias that people don't have the talent, but the reality is that they haven't been given the chance. And then gradually the team became more and more Colombian until in season 2 or part 2, with the exception of the DP in Laura Mora's episodes. He's Australian, but he had already done Laura's first movie, so they had a relationship. All of the people that made the most important key determining decisions of what ended up happening during the production or what ended up on the screen are Colombian. And they don't realize it, but I can tell you that because you don't realize it. When you're part of something, you are so involved in the day-to-day. Now that I'm not producing directly, but commissioning, I'm seeing that maybe I wasn't aware of what I was doing myself. Just doing it. You have to do it. How difficult and challenging it was for them when we set out to do the series and start production 5 years ago of the first part, versus how much better part 2 is and how they just got it made. And I remember that in the first part, we would have these conversations that somehow they needed to be like ratified or confirmed by us. And that's the same type of decisions, not the same decision itself, but the same type of decisions, the same type of things. In part 2, they were just making those decisions of themselves because they have now understood that they have the ability, they have the knowledge, they have the experience now, and they have the means. So I think that's the thing that really has shifted in Latin America and most of the world outside of the US, is that people are making film and television for the first time in their careers, have the means and the reach. The UK has been doing extraordinary television for decades. As a matter of fact, serial television, even though people may disagree with me, but it started in the US way back then, and then ABC and CBS and NBC started doing serial television a la BBC. But it has been, the best films and television have been done historically in France and the UK. But in Latin America, we were only doing telenovelas. But the reality is that people didn't it's not that they didn't have the talent, but they didn't have the budgets or the trust. Someone saying, just go and do your thing. And that's what we do. Just go and do your thing. Let's talk about what your thing is, and let's agree on what your thing is. But once we agree on what you want to do, just go and do it, and just know that we're here to support you. I think that's the main thing that I see. And it's going to be long-lasting. And a lot of those people that were working 100 Years of Solitude, now we're almost done. We're a week and a half from finishing the final episode of the second season. Most of the people that are not working anymore because their jobs are done in the series are working in series in Colombia or outside of Colombia that 3 or 4 years no one would have called them for that role. And some of them for our competitors, and I'm super fine with that. Some people go like, oh, it's like your little ecosystem. Oh, how's that even smart? People need to go, learn, come back. They come back with more experience. And it's incredible what they are doing. The directors are getting offers from all over the world. The writers, one of our writers was just episodic writing in season 2, and now she's the producer and showrunner on another series for us. And just in 4 years, she went from writing small television to being episodic, to being the head writer, to being a showrunner. And now she has all these offers. I think it's just the way industry blows up. I think talent, actually what they need is people that trust them. I mean, it's historical. It's not like it didn't. The most important painters were trusted historically by the rich people. It's not unique to culture or to athletes or to scientists that they need someone to say, hey, go and you're extraordinary. I'll take care of you, and you go and become even more extraordinary.
And do you think there are lessons for Mexico, or is Mexico already where Colombia now is and it doesn't need that extra push?
Yeah, I think what we need to figure out in Mexico, and not we Netflix, we as an industry, is the equilibrium between quantity and quality. And I think that's the main challenge we may face as an industry, is where the desire for more quantity, then you start getting the diminishing returns. And I think that's difficult because the reality, I understand that when you're in a production company, I used to own a production company, you have to keep the cash flowing in order to keep your company working. So sometimes I go like, isn't it better just for you to do less? Of course, because I'm not in charge of the cash flow. It's like, why don't you do less but bigger and more ambitious and take more time to do your thing? But I still need them to be successful companies, because you don't want a producer producing for you that is not financially successful, because then they are not going to do a good job for you. So that's the equilibrium we have to figure out with my competitors and the industry, because Mexico is churning a lot of volume, but we need to raise the bar. And I think we need to raise the bar. And it's easier to raise the bar in those countries where we make less, because then the talent is not as spread out amongst so many projects. So that's the thing. And then making sure we figure out the equilibrium also, what we were saying earlier about those new creators, of the core of the slate that we need to put out in front of our members so that they feel satisfied with it for their memberships, versus those unique swings that are completely outside of the paradigm of the logic, but that could become the new paradigm. And I think that's the thing that I say. What today is the logic ends up becoming the logic. What today makes absolutely no sense, then it becomes the thing that is everybody's going for. So it's like we have to figure that out. How is it that we empower those shows and movies that, in theory, if you and I were, this guy has an idea, oh my God, he's lost his mind. But then sometimes, like, are we willing to bet here and there on someone that apparently is not sane, but has this incredible idea for which he or she feel extraordinarily passionate about, and then making also sure that they have the right people around them in order to make their idea is preserved but properly executed. So that's the thing that I'm focusing most of my time in Mexico.
Do you think that's why Mexico, if you exclude the Hispanic audience in the US and Spanish-speaking in South America, hasn't had recently a lot of global hits, like Adolescents from the UK or the Korean content that's been wildly successful around the world? Mexico content tends, from what I can see, and the information isn't public, is mainly digested in its home market and Spanish-speaking markets, but hasn't really kind of gone big in Korea or gone big in England as those programs have gone big here.
Yeah, and I think that's what the thing for sure. And it's common data, not only from us, from our competitors, that there is that ability that Mexican content has to be efficient in Spanish-speaking countries and some countries where they watch a lot of melodrama because in some countries, like in Europe or more the Mediterranean countries, some countries in Africa, they love the Mexican melodramas or the Colombian melodramas for sure. Is that what are those outsized breaking hits that do not fall into this more conventional paradigm? And I think we haven't had those. We've had some, but we haven't had them as recently, like El Eternauta or 100 Years of Solitude. And for sure, our team is aware, and we're thinking what's next. And we're working on some stuff that we think that could be there. Las Muertas was a very interesting exercise for us because it wasn't massive in terms of audience outside of Mexico. It was huge in Mexico in terms of audience, but it was like something that really awoke a sense of the quality of this show is extraordinary, but it was more niche and more premium, more elitist, not premium. But we're working on some that I think is going to be extraordinary. We're working on the Frida Kahlo adaptation, and we're going at it, a bio-series, more in the filmmaker-driven point of view than a more conventional drama, I think. And I think that's going to be great, but we're working on some other ideas that needs to be reaching for the stars in the sense of El Eternauta or 100 Years of Solitude. I also feel that when those series in Mexico are very, very, in order for them to be huge in Mexico, and then if they become very successful in Mexico, have an opportunity to be relevant outside of the US, because Adolescence in Korea and in the UK and Squid Game in Korea were huge hits locally. So it's not that the success outside of their home markets has nothing to do with the local success. I think they are super local, that somehow found a way to be global. But that's the thing. They need to still be rooted in the local societal concerns and worries. Both of those shows that you mentioned actually are very societal driven, very about something that is the highly political, high level economic Korean way of looking at life, capitalism as at its highest as it is in Korea, and then the social discourse of Korean and British television forever, from Ken Loach to whatever, it's really rooted into the way that adolescence is built and told. So I think social television and film that are being made in the UK for decades, so it's not new, but it's extraordinarily told. And I think that's the great thing about adolescence. It's like, British people really are very good at making social television, but this is also high-octane entertainment, and people loved it outside of, and found it relevant, and found the metaphor very relevant to every single country in the world. So we have to still keep the Mexican metaphor, because if we try to cheat into making something global, it's not going to work out for Mexicans, and thus make no sense. But it has to be, so Mexicans, all this to get to my point that in Mexicans, they really love it when it's very rooted into Mexicanity, because it's such a strong culture, and our identity is so unique. We're seeing this past few days with the World Cup, and it's like World Cup has been like an opening, eye-popping week for me, or 2 weeks, because all of a sudden, all of the people from Korea, Japan, Morocco, that are here and are finding Mexico to be extraordinarily the best thing they've ever lived. And now all of this, the Moroccan, the head coach from the Moroccan team saying, Mexico is the best team, the best country in the world. And we will want their games to happen in Morocco. And then the Brazilian politicians saying the World Cup should, not this World Cup, every single World Cup should happen in Mexico. Like, Mexico is the thing, and we need to figure that out in scripted and unscripted television and films as well.
Do you think they'd ever let you buy the World Cup rights for Mexico?
It's that difficult one because it's not available, so I don't think so. But if they were, I would.
Eventually, I mean, in 8 years.
If they were, I would fight for them. We got the female World Cup in Canada and the US. So it's not that we haven't done that. But I think the male World Cup is like super sold. somehow I'm not an expert on audiovisual rights, but if they were available, I would fight to get the budget approved for sure.
Would you ever go into news in Mexico?
I think news is more of a linear television thing, and I don't know how is it that we can be very good at it. And I think also internet has become, the internet, like podcasts, not podcasts, no, but like the people, their own channels on YouTube have become also very successful on news. I don't think how we can be very good at news, but I don't know. I don't know how we would be good at it.
Do you think there's a Netflix effect on the economy, not just in terms of investing $1 billion, but making culture more strongly rooted in society, making politics perhaps and social issues more open and more visible?
Sure. Okay. On the economy part, I think I'm not dumb. I'm not competing with production of cars or textile or oil or gas in Mexico, which are huge businesses. But I truly defend, as a Mexican and as Latin American and as part half Spanish, is that our business, the audiovisual culture or the audiovisual industry, creates an economy that has an additional impact, which is the societal impact. And I really, really feel, otherwise I wouldn't do this. I have to be completely honest. I really, really feel personally that the impact in society of that cultural, that film and television has, is not only creating highly qualified, highly paid jobs, which is one of the jobs that creates the most highly qualified and highly paid jobs in the world. It also creates a sense of pride, a sense of identity, a sense of ownership, a sense of reflection, of looking, an ability to look into who we are through our artists, through the stories we tell each other, mirror into our society. That is very important. And I think those countries with very strong film and television traditions are very healthy democracies. Right now, it's tough to say that, and some people will fight me on this, but healthier than the others. And I think also it creates this domino effect that the multiplying factor of the acceleration of our business can be bigger than any other business where supply needs to be very, very correlated with demand. So basically, yes, we have the ability to produce more cars, but people are not buying more cars. I'm just trying to make a comparison. But people are willing to watch more film and television. So we make more film and television and better film and television, then it's not as limiting as some other more fungible industries that produce chips. There's only a limited amount of chips that people can buy or cars.
Last question. Would the Paco 30 years ago, if he was here today, would he have gone to Spain to seek his creative fortune, or would he have seen enough opportunities in Mexico to stay here?
I didn't go to Spain as a thing that I thought I was going to move. I went to Spain on vacation. So then, I don't know, and then I stayed for 28 years. I think it was an extraordinary thing for me. I had a wonderful time. It was the happiest years of my life. I grew up in there. I became whoever I am right now, for the good and the bad, in Madrid. I was a kid when I moved, so I thought I was this super incredible, smart person. I was 20, and now I realize I was very silly. But the only thing is that I think there is opportunities that I have lost as a person if I had moved back to Mexico a little earlier, which I think is the biggest thing as a person, not as an executive, as a person. I appreciate my bosses is giving me this opportunity to do it in my country and not stay in Spain. Logically, you think about it, the logic would have been for them to leave me in Spain and not bring me back to Mexico, because I'd never produced anything in Mexico before. I knew all the producers because we were co-producing and seeing people in markets and festivals, and then it's a very fluid industry. The Spanish language industry in the world is very fluid between filmmakers, directors, actors, etc. It's the advantage of the film, of our industry, which is the advantage of the English language industry too. It's very fluid. That's the big advantage of why English television and film and Spanish language television and film are bigger than anything else, is because there are so many of us. So it's like absurd. But I don't know. I would have stayed in Mexico if I had known.
Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of Max Moves. We hope you enjoyed it. Please continue reviewing us, sharing our podcast, and we hope to have you back next week.